Hi, I'm Olivia from Classroom 42, and today we're doing a full exam walkthrough for Edexcel GCSE History Paper 2P. In this video, I'll be doing an exam overview, a walkthrough of each question type, some Grade 9 example answers, and some exam questions for you to try at the end as well. So, Paper 2, Section P. So, your Paper 2 will be split into two sections. Section B is on the British Depth Study, which we have already got a video for, and in this video we're going to focus on the Section P, which is focusing on your period study. So that will either be Spain and the New World, British America, American West, superpowers in the Cold War, or conflict in the Middle East, depending on which topic your school does. For Paper 2, so that's Sections B and P, it is a written exam that is 1 hour and 50 minutes long in total. It is 64 marks and it is 40% of your history GCSE. Right, let's have a look at our question types. So for Section P, there are 3 different exam question types that you will get. Your question 1A and 1B will always be explain one consequence of, and those are both 4 marks each. Your question 2 will be a write and narrative account question, and that is worth 8 marks. And then your question 3, there'll be explain the importance of questions, but basically you'll get 3 different explain the importance of questions and you choose 2 of those, and each of them are worth 8 marks, so it's 16 marks in total for the question. So for questions 1A and 1B, so these are your explain one consequence of questions, which are worth 4 marks each. So for these questions, you are marked for AO2 and AO1. So you get 2 marks for your AO2, so this is your analysis of history. So for this question, it will specifically be the analysis of consequence. And then you'll also get 2 marks for your AO1, so that is your knowledge and understanding of the topic. This means to achieve 4 marks, you need to identify a consequence and explain why it came about, and draw on your knowledge of features of the time period using specific information to demonstrate your understanding. So let's take a look at an example answer and question for this question type. So in today's video, I'm going to be looking at the superpowers and Cold War topic, but obviously all the exam technique will cross over with whichever topic your school does. Okay, so our question is explain one consequence of Gorbachev's New Thinking. And here is our example answer for this question. So you can see here I've just written 1 paragraph on the one consequence, and analysed that consequence in order to get my 4 out of 4 marks. So you can see first of all I have identified the consequence, so we've just used the wording of the question. One consequence of Gorbachev's New Thinking was the increase in political and social freedoms in the Soviet Union. So that's my consequence. Next we're looking at AO1, which is our knowledge. So, information about the consequence, facts, figures, key people, key dates, all of that kind of thing. So I've written about the policy of Glasnost, which aimed to make the government more transparent, giving Soviet citizens greater freedom of speech, including the ability to criticise the government and discuss previously taboo subjects. And then we need to hit the AO2, which is our analysis. So we're analysing explaining what the consequence was basically of Gorbachev's New Thinking. So we're explaining this with our analysis. So this openness led to a surge in public debate, political activism and demands for further reforms. It also exposed deep dissatisfaction with the Soviet system, which contributed to unrest and a loss of faith in the Communist Party. So there we've just given our analysis, and that's all you need to do to get your 4 marks on those explain one consequence of questions. Okay, for the next question, this is write a narrative account, and this one is worth 8 marks. So for this question, it's not quite as big as our explain whys or our how far do you agrees, because you're more kind of writing an account of what happened rather than exactly why it happened or what it caused. But yeah, it's basically, we still use the same sort of format as we would in, for example, an explain why question, but just on a bit of a smaller scale, because obviously it's only worth 8 marks. So for this question, I would recommend writing 3 Peel paragraphs, focusing on 3 key events relating to the topic or theme in the question. Just like in our 12 and 16 markers, you will get 2 stimulus points for this question. So that's the 2 bullet points of possible key events that you could talk about. But if you are using those stimulus points, you must also make sure that you include at least 1 point of your own in order to get top marks. But if you don't want to use the stimulus points, obviously that's completely fine. You can just use points of your own anyway. And the other key thing about this particular question is because you're writing a narrative account, you must be writing in chronological order. So you must make sure that your first paragraph is the event that happened first, then your middle paragraph is the event that happened second, and your last one is the last event. Okay, so for your point, obviously, same as always, we're just stating our point. So the first, second, final key event of your event in the question was ... And again, just making sure to write about the events in the order that they happened. So it's always a really good idea for this question, even though it's a little bit of a smaller answer than your bigger essay questions, it's good to just make sure that you are planning it, and so you know what your 3 paragraphs are going to be, so you know what order you put them in, because obviously if you just start writing and then you realise your last paragraph is actually something that happened before the other 2 points, then you're going to lose out on a lot of marks. Then you want to add in your evidence. This is really key for this question because you're writing an account of what happened, so your evidence is really, really key here. So stats, places, events, names, dates, just kind of exactly what happened. Then you're going to explain. So you're going to show how this evidence links to your point to the event in the question. And then you're going to link back to the event to ensure you're keeping a focus on the question at all times. So let's take a look at an example question and answer for the narrative account question. So for this question, we've got write a narrative account analysing the key events in the early tensions between East and West in the years 1941 to 58. So normally with these questions, they'll focus on a larger event or, for example, like early tensions or conflict within a specific time period. And they'll usually give you your date period as well. So make sure that when you're writing a question, you make sure that your points are within the period that they give you. Then we have our stimulus points. So you can see here we've got the Yalta Conference and we've got the Long and Novikov telegrams. And as always, making sure that you don't just rely on those 2 stimulus points, you also need to include at least 1 point of your own. So here is our example answer. So you can see here I've got 3 paragraphs. There's no need to do an introduction or a conclusion for this one. You can just go straight into your paragraphs. And you can see here I've got my first paragraph on the Yalta Conference. We've got the second paragraph on the Long and Novikov telegrams. And our final paragraph is on our own point, which is about the satellite states. So first things first, as always, we are stating our point. So we're just using the wording from the question. One key event that created early tension was the Yalta Conference. Then we want to give our evidence. So this is really important for this question as it is a narrative account. So we're accounting, we're giving the account of what happened. So for this one, we are saying about what the conference was, who was there. So the USA, USSR and Britain agreeing to split up Germany after its defeat to 4 occupation zones, with one being controlled by France, USA, Britain and the USSR. And we're also talking about how the Allies also agreed to set up the United Nations during the Yalta Conference. Then we are giving our explanation. So this is explaining how this led to the early tensions between the East and West. So Roosevelt believed that Stalin would not expand Soviet territory beyond Poland, but Stalin had no intention of keeping his promises. And then we're doing a quick link back to the question. This increased tensions between East and West because leaders made promises they could not keep, setting a precedent for dishonesty. And then we just do the exact same in our other 2 paragraphs. So we've got our next point, which is the Long and Novikov telegrams. We've got our evidence, so we are explaining what those telegrams were. So we're talking about who was involved, what the telegram said, and what that led to. Then we are explaining what sort of that led to. So it confirmed to both sides that peaceful relations were over and both leaders took a tougher stance on each other. And finally, we're just giving our link back to the question. They shifted attitudes from cautious cooperation to open suspicion and laid the groundwork for the Cold War. And finally, for our last point about the satellite states, we are again, as always, giving our evidence, so talking about what the satellite states were, who was involved, and how Stalin got these. So Stalin rigged the elections and intimidated politicians. We're explaining how this led to the early tensions. So by 1948, the whole of Eastern Europe had communist governments under Moscow's control, and the West saw this as evidence of Soviet expansion and aggression, increasing fears of a communist takeover. And then our final little link back to the question, this cemented the Cold War and further increased tensions between East and West. So hopefully you can see there that our paragraphs don't go into as much detail as say they would on a 12-mark explain why, because this one you're just sort of giving a narrative of what happened rather than explaining exactly why each thing happened and what it caused and what the consequences were. We're just sort of giving a bit more of a briefer overview of the account of what happened. Okay, and then for our final question, which is the explain the importance of X to Y. So again, like I mentioned earlier, for this question, you'll get 3 of these questions, but you only choose 2 of them. So make sure you don't do all of them because you won't get any extra marks. So you just need to do 2 of these ones and they are worth 8 marks each. So it was 16 marks in total for question 3. So for this question, again, it focuses on AO1 and AO2. So you get 4 marks for AO1, which is the knowledge and understanding of the topic, and you get 4 marks for AO2, which is your analysis of the history. For this question, specifically how you explain the importance. For each response, complete these 2 steps. So first of all, you need to demonstrate your knowledge of X using relevant and specific information, and demonstrate your understanding by situating it in the larger context of Y. So normally within the question, it will ask you to explain the importance of X, which would normally be a particular event, in relation to Y. So often it will be kind of, for example, for this topic, it could be the tensions between the superpowers. It might be wider conflict between certain groups of people. So it will usually ask you to, explain the importance of a particular event in relation to wider context of your topic. And then the next thing you need to do is use this evidence to clearly explain why X is important to Y. The key to this question is choosing information that is relevant to your question, and for each piece of information you should be able to explain how it made X important specifically to Y. For this question, we would recommend writing 2 paragraphs, each on a different reason why X is important to Y. So let's have a look at an example question. So this question is explain the importance of the Berlin crisis for relations between the USA and the Soviet Union. So you can see here our X, or our event, is the Berlin crisis, but we're looking at why this was important for Y. So Y is our relations between the USA and the Soviet Union. So for this question, we have written 2 paragraphs, both on a different reason why the Berlin crisis was important for relations between the USA and the Soviet Union. Now for this question, it can be kind of difficult to pick out 2 specific different reasons why it was important. So a good one to always do is you can explain kind of the short-term consequences of the event, and then you could also kind of explain more of the longer-term consequences or the importance of it, of what happened afterwards or what kind of it led to, that sort of thing. So you can see here our first paragraph is talking about how the Berlin crisis significantly increased Cold War tensions, but then our final paragraph is talking about how it led to the formal division of Germany and Europe. So as always, we start off with our point. And then for this question, we are focusing on AO1 and AO2. So we've got our AO1 knowledge here. So we're talking all about what the Berlin crisis, the Berlin blockade, what happened, the Berlin airlift, and talking about a bit of historical information about that. And then we need to bring in our AO2 analysis, talking about why this was important for relations between the USA and the Soviet Union. So it's really important that you don't just talk about the importance of the event and ignore the rest of the question. You need to make sure you're saying why this was important for relations between the USA and the Soviet Union, or whatever your why point in the question is. So here we're saying this was important because it marked the first major confrontation of the Cold War. Each side, so USA and Soviet Union, saw the other's actions as aggressive. The USA saw the airlift as a challenge to its control, while the USSR saw the airlift as a challenge to its control, while the USA saw the blockade as an attempt to starve people into submission. So we're kind of analysing why that particular event was important for relations between the USA and the Soviet Union. And then on our next paragraph, we're doing the exact same, but with a different point. So this time we are talking about how the Berlin crisis was important because it led to the formal division of Germany and Europe. We're giving our AO1 knowledge, so we're talking about the creation of West Germany and East Germany, and how Berlin was also divided up into East and West. And then we need to analyse it, so we are talking about why this was important. So this division was important because it clearly showed that Europe was now split into two hostile blocs, the capitalist West and the communist East. The two Germanys became symbols of this divide, and the division led to future flashpoints like the Berlin Wall and the arms race, keeping relations hostile for decades. So again, we're always bringing it back to why that event was important for relations between the USA and the Soviet Union. Okay, so that is all of the questions within Paper 2, Section P. So now it is your time to have a go. I will link some of our 8-mark questions below on all of the different period studies topics. And for these questions, you'll be able to get instant AI marks and feedback so you can see exactly how you've done. But good luck with your revision, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!